The USS Prometheus sliced through the expanse of space with an eerie hum, its engines pushing it toward a part of the galaxy that no human ship had ever ventured. Captain Ilara Holt stood on the bridge, her hands clasped behind her back, staring out at the vastness of the unknown. The view was breathtaking, fields of stars so distant they seemed like a distant memory, galaxies spinning in patterns far beyond human comprehension. Yet, the closer they came to the abyss, the less comforting the beauty of the stars became. "Captain," Lieutenant Carter called, his voice low with a mix of concern and awe. "We're nearing the edge of the designated coordinates. The gravimetric anomalies are already starting to affect our sensors." Ilara nodded, but didn't turn from the viewport. The abyss had been an enigma for centuries, an area of space where even the most sophisticated star charts had failed, a region so dangerous that entire expeditions had vanished without a trace. For years, it had been dismissed as a cosmic wasteland, too unstable to risk exploration. But then, the signal came, a weak, distorted transmission that, when decoded, turned out to be unmistakably human. The signal, faint and fractured, had originated from deep within the abyss. It wasn't just a distress call. There were coordinates hidden within the transmission, coordinates to a place that no one had ever charted, where no human had ever gone. And for some reason, against all rational judgment, the Federation had decided to send the Prometheus to investigate. "Captain, this doesn't feel right," Carter said, his hand hovering over the controls. His fingers twitched nervously, and Ilara could hear the unease in his voice. "The anomalies we're detecting, they're not just gravitational. There's something alive out here." "Alive?" Ilara asked, finally turning to face him. The sharpness of her voice made Carter hesitate, but he quickly pushed the sensor data toward her. He pointed to the holographic display, where pulsing waves of energy rippled in an unnatural pattern. "Look at these signatures. It's not just the space-time distortions. There's something else in play, something intelligent." Ilara's jaw tightened. She had prepared herself for the dangers of this mission, but the idea of an unknown intelligence watching them from the depths sent a chill through her. Yet there was no turning back now. The crew was already too deep into the abyss to abandon the mission, and the curiosity gnawing at her was too strong to ignore. The question of what had happened to the missing expedition, the one that had been sent years earlier, was too important. There was a part of her that hoped they would find the answers. Another part? Well, that part was deeply unsettled. "Keep the shields at maximum," she ordered, her voice calm and steady despite the tension running through her. "Prepare for any fluctuations, and don't let your guard down. We're not just here to observe. We're here to understand." "Aye, Captain," Carter replied, his fingers flying over the console as the crew worked to stabilize the ship. But even as he spoke, his expression darkened. Ilara could feel the subtle shift in the air. Something had changed. The ship's artificial gravity flickered for a brief moment, like a blink, and then a strange pressure seemed to settle over the entire bridge. A low hum started to reverberate through the ship, not from the engines, but from somewhere outside. It was too rhythmic to be a natural phenomenon, too deliberate. The sound was like a distant chant, ancient and ominous. "Report," Ilara demanded, turning sharply toward the sensor console. "We've detected something." "A structure," came the response from Lieutenant Adaro, the ship's lead navigator. "An object, massive. It's not on any of our charts, but it's there, embedded in the heart of the abyss." "Can we make a visual?" Ilara asked, her pulse quickening. "There's too much interference, Captain. I can't—" Before Adaro could finish, the ship lurched. The Prometheus rocked violently as the gravitational anomalies flared. The ship's lights flickered, casting eerie shadows across the bridge. Ilara stumbled slightly, grabbing onto the armrest of her chair to steady herself. "Status?" she barked. "Unstable," Carter muttered, his hands flying across the console as his eyes widened. It's like the fabric of space is folding. We need to recalibrate the gravity matrix before he could finish. The ship lurched again, harder this time. The entire crew was thrown from their seats, the metal groaning in protest. As alarms blared, Ilara's eyes widened. The ship's viewfinder blinked on, displaying an image of a massive dark silhouette in the distance. It was impossibly vast, a monolithic structure half obscured by swirling clouds of energy. A voice crackled over the intercom, hollow and distorted. "Leave this place," it whispered. The hair on Ilara's neck stood on end. "We've crossed into something far worse than we imagined," she muttered under her breath. But then she straightened, her eyes hardening. "Hold fast. This is why we're here. We're human, and we don't turn back." The Prometheus shook again as the ominous hum outside grew louder, reverberating through the ship's hull. The strange voice, distorted, like 1,000 whispers blended into one, echoed through the intercom again. "Leave this place, Captain." Ilara Holt's hands clenched into fists. Her pulse quickened, but she forced herself to stay calm, her eyes sharp as she assessed the situation. There was no question in her mind now. They had crossed into uncharted, hostile territory. Whatever was out there, whatever they had awakened, was more dangerous than they'd anticipated. And yet, turning back wasn't an option. "Report!" Ilara snapped, her voice cutting through the chaos. Lieutenant Carter was the first to respond, his face pale, his fingers moving frantically over his console. "Gravity fluctuations are off the charts, Captain. Whatever's out there, it's messing with our systems. We're losing control of the engines." "Helm, can you stabilize the course?" she asked, turning toward the helmsman, who was struggling to regain control of the ship's trajectory. "No, Captain," the helmsman replied, his voice strained. "We're being pulled toward that structure. It's like it's pulling us in." Ilara's gaze snapped back to the viewfinder. The dark shape in the distance loomed larger, shifting in impossible ways. It wasn't just an object. It was a structure. Monumental, ancient, and alien. The longer she stared at it, the more disorienting it became. It seemed to flicker, bending space itself. One moment, it was a monolithic mass. The next, it felt as if it had no defined edges at all, like something too vast for human comprehension. "We're on a collision course with it, Captain." Lieutenant Adaro's voice was urgent as he tried to adjust the ship's navigation. "Evasive maneuvers now," Ilara ordered, though she knew it might be too late. The Prometheus groaned as the thrusters fired, struggling to break free of the pull. But it was as if the structure itself reached out with invisible tendrils, ensnaring them with an unseen force. The stars outside seemed to stretch and distort, twisting into ribbons of light as the ship buckled under the strain. Then, without warning, the Prometheus stopped. The vibrations ceased, and the ship hung suspended in space, completely still, as though frozen in time. Ilara's breath caught in her throat. "What happened?" We're not moving," Carter said, eyes wide in disbelief. "It's like something locked us in place." Then the strange voice returned. This time it wasn't just a whisper. It reverberated directly in their minds. "You have trespassed. You will be judged." The crew went silent, eyes darting between one another. The cold, deep terror in the voice wasn't just a warning, it was a command, a proclamation of some ancient authority. "I've never heard anything like this before," Carter muttered, clearly shaken. "It's not a simple transmission. It's not even language as we know it." Ilara turned back to the viewport, her mind racing. She wasn't sure whether the voice was from the structure itself or something even more ancient that had once occupied it. It didn't matter. What mattered now was survival. The Prometheus was caught, no longer an explorer, but a trapped vessel in a domain that had never been meant for humankind. "Captain, I'm detecting a secondary signal," Adaro said, his voice strained. "It's coming from the structure. Can you pinpoint the source?" Ilara asked. He hesitated for a moment, as if afraid of what he might find. "It's not like any signal I've ever seen before. It's not electromagnetic. It's almost like it's resonating directly through the ship's systems." "We're being linked somehow." Ilara's stomach churned. This wasn't just a structure, it was alive, or at least it was behaving like it was. "Send a probe," Ilara ordered, her voice tense. "I want to know what's inside. We need information." Adaro hesitated again. "Captain, with all due respect, the probe might not survive the interference. Whatever is affecting our ship, it could tear it apart." Ilara's jaw clenched. "Do it. We don't have a choice." Moments later, the probe was launched, a sleek metallic object designed to withstand the harshest environments. As it drifted toward the structure, the interference grew more intense. Static built on the comms, and the probe's telemetry began to glitch, distorting into maddening patterns. Then, just as the probe was about to reach the object, the feedback became unbearable and the probe signal was lost. "Probe's down," Adaro reported grimly. Ilara didn't flinch. "This place is alive with energy. It's trying to communicate with us, or it's trying to break us." Suddenly, a violent tremor shook the ship. The lights flickered. An unnatural wind seemed to sweep through the corridors, and cold air filled the bridge, a stark contrast to the controlled warmth they'd grown used to. Then, just as abruptly, everything stopped. A soft, eerie hum filled the silence, a sound like the deep, resonant tone of a gong echoing through the ship's hull. And that voice, the one that had first spoken to them, came again. But this time, the words were clear. "You are not welcome here. The judgment will begin." Before Ilara could respond, a massive shape, twisting, formless, emerged from the shadows in front of the viewport, filling the entire screen. It was not a ship. It was not a being. It was something far older, a force of nature that defied description, its presence both terrifying and mesmerizing. "We're not alone," Ilara whispered, her voice trembling with realization. "We've awoken something far beyond us." The silence that followed the ominous voice was thick with dread, an unsettling stillness that seemed to hang in the very air of the bridge. Captain Ilara Holt stood motionless, staring at the grotesque, twisting shape that filled the viewport, a creature of unimaginable proportions, neither fully tangible nor entirely intangible. Its form shifted, like a vast cloud of dark smoke, with glimmers of cold, glittering light flickering within it, as though it were made of shadows, yet pulsing with a life force all its own. Lieutenant Carter's hands trembled as he adjusted. The sensors, but the ship's readings were useless. The entity defied all attempts at comprehension. The scanner's signals twisted in unpredictable directions, becoming incomprehensible under the pressure of whatever force was emanating from the being. "Captain, it's not registering. This thing, it's beyond anything we've encountered." Ilara's eyes never left the creature, though her mind raced. "Whatever it is, it's controlling the space around us. We're stuck here for now, but we need to keep our wits about us. We can't let it break us." The entity, as though hearing her words, shifted again, its form fluctuating like liquid in a windless storm. Then it spoke again. This time, it wasn't through the intercom, but inside their minds, a cold alien voice that echoed in their thoughts. "You trespass on sacred ground. This is not your domain. You have awakened me. Now you must face the consequence of your intrusion." The voice was malevolent, timeless, and all-encompassing. Ilara gritted her teeth, but she could feel her resolve wavering. The crew was quiet, visibly shaken, each member gripped by the chilling presence of the entity. "What is it?" Carter asked quietly, his voice filled with awe and terror. "What does it want from us?" "I don't know," Ilara replied, her mind racing for a solution. But it's not here to negotiate. We need to understand what we're dealing with, or we're going to lose control. Keep trying to get any data we can on it. She turned to Adaro, whose eyes were wide with fear. Can you get a signal out of the structure, or send any kind of transmission? No chance, Captain, Adaro said. It's like the structure is actively blocking us. Even the comm systems are being absorbed by its presence. Then the entity pulsed, and the lights in the bridge flickered once more. The temperature in the room dropped dramatically, as though the very air was being drained of warmth. A wave of nausea washed over the crew as a new sensation began to gnaw at their minds. A sense of being observed, studied, and weighed as, though they were nothing more than ants beneath the entity's gaze, the air crackled, and the voice spoke again, louder, more insistent. You will know what it is like to be trapped in the darkness, to be lost in the vastness of time. I am what is ancient, what endures beyond all things. You, too, will endure, but only in pain. The bridge seemed to close in on Ilara as the words echoed in her mind. She knew the voice wasn't merely a threat. It was a promise, a horrifying glimpse into the fate that awaited them. This was no mere alien intelligence. This was something primordial, something that had existed long before humanity even knew how to look to the stars. We can't just sit here and wait for it to tear us apart, Ilara said, her voice sharp with determination. We need to break free from its grip. Carter, how long until we can regain control of the ship? He quickly checked his console again, his face pale. Not long, Captain. If we can reverse the energy flow and counteract the gravity distortions, we might be able to regain control. But it's going to take time, and I don't know how long we'll be able to hold it off. As if in response, the entity's form shifted again. This time it expanded, filling the viewport with a vast, swirling mass of black energy, stretching across the entirety of the bridge's view. It was as though the very stars had been swallowed by the darkness. The ship trembled once more, and the entity's voice boomed within their minds, deep and thunderous. You cannot escape. Ilara felt a wave of terror threaten to overwhelm her, but she pushed it down, forcing herself to stay focused. She turned to her crew, her voice unwavering. Listen to me. We are not going to lose here. We're human. We've faced death, war, and the unknown before. But we always survive. We will survive this. But as the words left her mouth, she saw something that made her heart skip a beat. In the corner of the bridge, a shadow, dark, shifting, impossible, emerged from the corner, a figure standing in the periphery of the light. It wasn't a person, not entirely. It was a part of the entity, a manifestation, a being, just as vast and incomprehensible as the one outside. Its presence radiated dread, and its eyes, if they could be called eyes, stared right through Ilara, locking onto her with a gaze that felt like it could burn away her very soul. The figure spoke, its voice mingling with the alien hum of the entity around them. Do you understand now? You will not leave. No one has ever escaped the abyss. For the first time since the mission began, Ilara's confidence faltered. She was staring into the abyss, not just of space, but of something far darker, far older. But even as the figure's voice settled into her mind, something deep inside her stirred, a fierce, unrelenting desire to prove the entity wrong. No, she said, her voice barely a whisper. But it was enough. Not today. The creature's presence, the vast shifting shadow that seemed to warp the very fabric of reality, loomed over them. Ilara's heart pounded in her chest as she stared at the manifestation, a dark figure that seemed to bleed into the ship's walls, an impossible entity made of pure malevolence. The cold that seeped into her bones wasn't from the temperature drop, but from the sheer weight of what it represented. The figure's hollow eyes bored into her as if it could see every hidden fear, every doubt, and every weakness she had ever experienced. But Alara refused to flinch. She couldn't. Not now. "You are nothing but a moment in time," the figure intoned, its voice deep, its words resonating through the ship, vibrating in her chest. "All that you know, all that you have fought for, meaningless in the face of eternity. You are but an insignificant spark that will be consumed by the darkness." The ship trembled again, a sharp shudder that rattled their bones. Ilara's gaze never left the figure. "We may be small in the grand scheme of things, but that doesn't make us meaningless, and it sure as hell doesn't mean we're giving up." The figure's mouth twisted into a mockery of a smile. "You think you can fight what cannot be fought?" The air seemed to grow even colder, and the pressure within the bridge intensified, as if the ship were being slowly crushed under an invisible weight. The crew braced themselves, visibly struggling to breathe, each person fighting against the suffocating sensation. "Carter, are we anywhere near getting control back?" Ilara demanded, her voice sharp despite the pressure bearing down on them. Carter, pale and drenched in sweat, focused on his console. His fingers moved with frantic speed, his eyes darting back and forth. "I'm trying, Captain. The gravity field is distorting our systems. It's almost like the ship itself is fighting us." Ilara's mind raced. The entity wasn't just attacking them physically. It was tearing at the very heart of their resolve, pressing them to the edge of despair. It was a test, and every part of her, her crew, her ship, her will, was on the line. "Adaro, are we getting any signal from outside the abyss? Any kind of distress beacon?" she asked, her voice steady despite the growing pressure. Adaro glanced at his console, his fingers shaking. "I'm not picking up any transmissions. Whatever is here, it's blocking every attempt to communicate. We're alone out here, completely alone." "Alone?" The figure's voice mocked, a ripple of amusement in its tone. "No, Captain, you are not alone. We have watched you. We have watched your kind for eons. We have seen your struggle, your rise, and your inevitable fall." The ship groaned again, as though the very walls were bending to the will of the creature. Alara's gaze hardened. She could feel her heart hammering in her chest, but deep within her, something stirred, something unbreakable, a flame that refused to be extinguished. She reached over and grabbed Carter's arm. "I need more time, Lieutenant. Do whatever it takes to buy us time. We're not dying here. We're not giving in." Carter's eyes met hers, his fear evident. But there was something else there, too, a flicker of determination. "Aye, Captain." Ilara turned to the rest of her crew. "Listen up. We're facing something we don't understand, but we're not giving up. Humans don't die in the dark. We don't die alone." A few of the crew members exchanged uncertain glances, but they nodded, resolute. There was something in Ilara's voice, a conviction that sparked their own. The entity's form rippled again, and its voice grew colder. "You are fools. You cannot outlast the darkness. You will be consumed, as all others have been. You will know what it means to be forgotten." It was then that Ilara had a realization, a single thread of hope in the vast, crushing despair. The abyss, the entity, they were testing them. The darkness was not just about fear. It was about endurance, about willpower. It was trying to break them, to strip them of their spirit. But it had underestimated humanity. "No," Ilara said, her voice rising. "We are not your toys. We are human. We have faced far worse than this, and we always fight back." She turned to the helm. "Full power to the engines. We're pushing through. Carter, get us a clear path. Adaro, I want every sensor working at full capacity. We're going to find a way out of this." For a moment, the bridge was silent, the only sound the hum of the ship's systems as they struggled to regain power. Then, slowly, The crew began to work in unison, every hand on deck, every mind focused. And outside the ship, the vast form of the entity, its presence like a shadow in the darkness, watched them. It pulsed with an intensity that seemed to want, to crush them, to snuff them out like a candle in a storm. But Alara felt the tide begin to shift. They were humans, small and fragile, yes, but their spirit was a force unlike anything the abyss could understand. And in that moment, with the cold of the creature pressing down upon them, Alara knew something with certainty. They would survive. Not because they had the power to destroy the entity, but because they had the will to endure, to outlast the darkness. The battle had only just begun. The ship's interior hummed with the strained effort of the crew as they worked together, each one pushing past their fear, focusing on their tasks. Ilara Holt stood at the helm, her hands gripping the console as the Prometheus trembled beneath her. Every bone in her body screamed for respite, but there was no time. The ship was still locked in place, the unrelenting force of the entity pressing against them like a vice, threatening to crush their will. "Captain?" Carter's voice broke through the tension, shaky but determined. "I'm rerouting power to the engines, but we're still fighting the gravitational distortion. We'll need a clear line to push through it." The walls of the bridge flickered with unnatural lights, and Alara could hear the whispers of the entity in the back of her mind again, soft, insistent murmurs, each word carrying the weight of eternity. "You cannot outrun the dark." Alara gritted her teeth, her pulse rising. "We're not running! We're surviving!" Behind her, she could hear the faint sounds of equipment clicking, crew members scrambling to adjust controls, working tirelessly against the overwhelming odds. It was a cacophony of human resilience, of determination against forces beyond their understanding. Adaro's voice came through next, more composed than it had been. "Captain, I've finally managed to isolate the frequency distortion. If we can stabilize it, we can break through the entity's interference. It's the only chance we have." She didn't hesitate. "Do it, Adaro. We're all in. This is our moment." As Adaro worked his console, the pressure in the bridge began to mount again. The cold intensified, and the shadows outside the ship deepened, consuming the stars. The dark shape that loomed in the viewport expanded, its form becoming even more grotesque, like a ripple in the fabric of space itself, bending time and space to its will. A low, rumbling hum began to fill the air, louder than before, as if the entity was gathering its energy for something catastrophic. "You are powerless." The voice echoed in their minds, each syllable punctuated by an explosion of energy that sent shock waves through the hull of the ship. "I have witnessed the rise and fall of countless beings. You will be no different." Alara's jaw tightened. The entity was relentless, trying to break their spirits with its promises of annihilation. But she could feel the pulse of humanity within her, a collective fire that had ignited across the bridge. They would not be broken. Not today. Adaro's voice cut through the growing roar of the entity's influence. "Captain, I think I've got it. Rerouting the power grid now. I just need a few more seconds." The ship groaned under the strain. Lights flickered, consoles sparking with erratic bursts of static as the entity pushed harder against them. Alara glanced around the room, meeting the eyes of each crew member. Fear was still there, lurking in their gazes. But there was also something else. Defiance. "Carter," Alara said firmly, "how much longer until the engines are fully functional?" Carter's fingers flew over the console, the tension on his face palpable. 10 seconds, Captain. If the systems hold steady, we'll have enough power to make the push. But we need to break free before it overwhelms us. Once we're free of the gravitational pull, we'll have a chance." The hum of the ship seemed to build to a crescendo as Adaro's console flared with green light. "Captain," he said, voice tight with concentration, "I've stabilized the interference. We've got a clean channel." Ilara turned to Carter, nodding. "Now, Carter, full power." There was a brief silence, a moment of suspended tension. Then the engines roared to life. The ship lurched forward, its thrusters burning with a blinding intensity. Ilara's hands gripped the console as she fought to keep the Prometheus steady. They were pushing against an invisible force, but the power was there. Human ingenuity was winning out over the alien grip. Outside, the entity seemed to scream, the shadowy mass swirling and thrashing in a frantic, almost frantic movement. The entity wasn't used to resistance. It wasn't accustomed to being defied. Ilara's mind raced as the ship lurched, every inch forward a battle, every moment a test of their endurance. They were pushing against something far older, far darker than anything they had ever imagined. And yet, as the seconds stretched on, they were breaking through. The gravitational distortion weakened, then vanished entirely. The Prometheus surged forward, the grip of the entity loosening just enough for them to make their escape. "Captain," Carter said, his voice breaking through the tension. "We're free. We've broken through the distortion. The entity's hold is weakening." But before they could breathe a sigh of relief, the entity's voice roared one last time, louder than ever before. "This is not over. You have not won. The dark will always find you." The temperature in the bridge dropped even further, the walls groaning as if the ship were being stretched by some unseen force. The shadows outside writhed in fury, twisting into shapes too horrific to fully comprehend. It was as though the entire void of space around them had become the entity's domain. "We're not out of the woods yet," Ilara muttered, her fingers flying over the controls. "But we've got a chance. All we need to do is keep moving." The Prometheus shot forward, breaking free of the dark entity's reach. Stars once again filled the viewport, the familiar gleam of distant light offering a brief, fleeting moment of solace. But the battle wasn't over. The abyss was still out there, waiting for them to slip up. And Ilara knew they would never stop hunting. Not until they were nothing more than dust in the dark. The Prometheus was free, at least for now. The pressure that had suffocated the crew, the oppressive weight of the entity's influence, lifted as they broke through the distortion field. But Ilara knew better than to let her guard down. Ship's engines roared, burning with new life, and the stars outside the viewport slowly returned to their familiar, comforting pinpricks of light. Yet the creeping sense of dread never fully dissipated. The entity wasn't gone. It was still out there, watching, waiting. Ilara exhaled slowly, glancing over her shoulder at the rest of the crew. Their faces, once pale with terror, now showed a flicker of something else, determination. They had fought back, and they had survived. But they knew the battle wasn't over. "Not yet." "Report," Ilara ordered, her voice calm but sharp, pushing past the fatigue creeping into her bones. Carter was the first to speak, his voice still tinged with urgency. "Engines are stable, Captain. We're holding course for the outer rim. We've got the power we need to keep going, but it's going to take us some time to get out of the entity's reach, assuming it lets us." "We're not out of danger. Yet," Adaro added, his fingers dancing over his console. "The anomaly is still tracking us. Its presence is lingering, like a shadow chasing us through the dark." Ilara's eyes narrowed, her mind racing. The Prometheus had only barely escaped the grip of the abyss, but now they were in a race for time, a race they couldn't afford to lose. They needed to get far enough away from the anomaly to gain a foothold, enough distance to strategize, to prepare for whatever the entity would throw at them next. "We need to go dark," Ilara said firmly, turning back to the crew. "No signals, no emissions. We've bought ourselves a moment of breathing room, but it won't last. The entity is relentless. We've got to be smarter." The crew moved quickly, instinctively. The communications went silent, the lights dimmed, and the ship's energy readings were adjusted to minimal output. The Prometheus became a ghost in the darkness of space. But Ilara knew they couldn't hide forever. The entity would track them, adapt, and hunt them down. It had done so for eons, a creature of the dark, patient, and eternal. "How long until we're in the clear?" Ilara asked, locking eyes with Carter. Carter bit his lip, his gaze fixed on his console. "If we can keep this course and hold steady, we'll reach the outer rim in about 4 hours. From there, we'll have a better chance of getting out of the gravitational influence. But we still don't know what it's capable of once we're outside its field." Ilara nodded. 4 hours. They had 4 hours to find a way to stop the creature, or at least delay it long enough to escape. It wasn't much time, but it was all they had. "Prepare for worst-case scenario," she said, her voice cool and decisive. "Weapon systems, get them online. We're not going down without a fight." Adaro's fingers flew over the control panel, and the hum of the weapon systems activated. "Weapons primed. Ready to fire on your command, Captain." A shiver ran down Ilara's spine. She had always known humanity would face challenges, but nothing like this. Nothing had prepared them for. Something so ancient, so incomprehensible. They had no idea what the entity truly was, or why it had turned its attention to them. All they knew was that it wouldn't stop until it had consumed them. And yet, even in the face of the unimaginable, the crew stood united. Ilara felt the flicker of resolve inside her, the same spark of defiance that had kept them alive this long. It was that spirit, the human will to survive, that had carried them through the darkness. And it would be what carried them forward. "Captain," Carter's voice broke through her thoughts. "Something's wrong. The ship's sensors. There's a ripple in the space-time fabric. It's opening a breach." Ilara's blood ran, cold. "What kind of breach?" Carter stammered, his face draining of color. "It's an interdimensional rift. It's like the entity is tearing a hole in space itself, and it's opening right in front of us. The entire bridge." Fell silent as the crew looked at one another, fear flooding their faces. The breach was enormous, a vast tear in the very fabric of space, distorting light and reality itself. And at its center, a dark, swirling mass of energy pulsed like the heart of some monstrous beast. From the depths of the breach, something stirred. A voice echoed in their minds, no longer cold and distant, but intimate and suffocating. "You cannot escape. You belong to me, forever." The ship rocked violently, as if the very breach was trying to pull them in. Ilara's heart pounded. The entity had found them again, and now it was pulling them into its domain. "Full power to the engines!" Ilara shouted, grabbing hold of the console as the ship was rocked by the unnatural forces of the rift. "We need to break free! Now!" Carter's hands flew over the controls, but the ship groaned and shuddered under the strain. "I can't! The rift's pulling us in! We need more power!" Before Ilara could respond, the breach pulsed again, sending a shockwave through the ship that rattled every metal plate. The viewport darkened, the stars swallowed by the oncoming abyss. And then, in that moment of sheer terror, Ilara understood one thing with brutal clarity. They were not running anymore. They were fighting for their survival. The Prometheus shuddered violently as the breach's gravity field intensified, tugging at the ship with an almost tangible force. Ilara felt her breath catch in her throat as the viewport darkened, stars swallowed by the swirling abyss outside. The ship groaned, its hull creaking under the strain of trying to escape the rift's pull. "Carter!" Ilara shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Give me everything you've got! Power to the engines, now!" Carter's face was pale, his hands shaking as he worked the console. "I'm pushing it to the limit, Captain. The engines are maxed out, but the rift's gravity is stronger than we anticipated. We can't break free." The entire bridge was, filled with a low, terrifying hum, as if the ship itself were being consumed by the darkness. The walls trembled, and the ship's lights flickered erratically. Outside, the rift pulsed like a living thing, a black hole that beckoned with an inexorable pull. Ilara could feel it. This wasn't just a threat to their ship. It was a threat to everything they were, everything humanity had ever been. Adaro, can you reroute the navigational systems? Ilara asked, her voice steady but firm. We need a way to fight back anything. Adaro was furiously typing, sweat beading on his forehead. I'm trying, Captain, but the rift is interfering with everything. Even the navigational systems are warped. I can barely keep us on course. Another tremor rocked the ship and the lights flickered once again. The ship's energy readings were rapidly plummeting. If they didn't escape soon, they'd be lost in the rift forever. Then the voice came again, not through their comm systems, but inside their minds, closer, more intimate than before. You think you can escape? You cannot. I have claimed this place. You are mine now, and soon you will understand what it is to be truly lost. The voice was a low, hissing whisper, like a predator's purr. Ilara felt the coldness seep deeper into her bones, but she pushed it aside. She refused to give in. They were humans. They fought until the very end. All hands! Ilara's voice rang out, her command strong and clear. We're not giving up. Humanity never gives up. Her words cut through the fear in the room like a blade. There was a moment of hesitation, but then, one by one, the crew members looked up, meeting her eyes. They weren't giving up either. They couldn't. Not with everything they had fought for hanging in the balance. Captain, Carter's voice was desperate. The breach, it's shifting. The gravitational field's becoming more erratic. I can't stabilize it much longer. Then, we don't stabilize it, Ilara said, her voice ice-cold with resolve. We use it. The crew turned to her, confusion and uncertainty flashing across their faces. What do you mean? Adaro asked, brow furrowing. We can't fight the rift, but maybe we can use it to our advantage, Ilara said, her eyes narrowing as she thought quickly. If we can find a way to send a shockwave through it, maybe we can create an opening, something that'll give us a chance to break free. Carter looked skeptical. You're suggesting we weaponize the rift? That's insane. Maybe, Ilara said, her expression unflinching. But we're out of options. A tense silence filled the bridge as Carter and Adaro exchanged looks. The rift was like a ravenous beast, but Ilara knew that in the chaos of it, there might just be a way to exploit its instability. They had to try. Adaro, you're the one who can manipulate the ship's systems the most, Ilara said, her voice calm but urgent. Recalibrate the internal power conduits. Set up a controlled burst. Send it directly into the rift's gravitational field. If we time it right, it could destabilize the rift enough to give us a window to escape. Adaro hesitated, his hands hovering over the console. Then, as the ship rocked again, he nodded. All right, I'll do it. The crew sprang into action. Adaro worked furiously to reroute the power systems, his face a mask of concentration. Carter gripped his console with white-knuckled force, his eyes scanning the ship's readouts for any sign of hope. The seconds stretched, each one feeling like an eternity as the ship fought against the crushing grip of the rift. Outside, the breach seemed to expand, a vast hole in space, pulsating with ominous energy. Ilara's heart thundered in her chest. She could hear the entity's voice again, taunting them, its presence so overwhelming it felt like it was in every corner of her mind. You cannot win. You belong to me. Ilara shut her eyes for a brief moment. She could feel the weight of its power, the certainty of its claims. But she also knew one undeniable truth. Humanity had always been more than just survival. They were a force of nature. They were fighters. And they wouldn't be consumed without a fight. Adaro, Ilara barked. How much longer? We're ready, he shouted, his voice rising with adrenaline. Charging the burst. Get ready, Captain. Ilara nodded and turned to Carter. On my mark, full power to the engines. We need to punch through that rift and get clear. No hesitation. The tension was unbearable as the ship hummed with power, the entire crew holding their breath. Ilara felt the weight of their collective resolve, the strength of humanity's will to survive. They had made it this far. There was no turning back. Now, the breach outside pulsed again, brighter, more intense. Now! Ilara shouted. The ship's engines roared to life as the crew braced themselves for the final desperate maneuver. The entire bridge was alive with tension, the hum of the power conduits growing steadily louder as Adaro's fingers danced across the console. Sweat beaded on his forehead, his eyes never leaving the flashing readouts. Outside the viewport, the rift grew ever more monstrous, an impossibly vast tear in the fabric of space, its edges jagged and pulsating with a malevolent, inky darkness. The very air seemed to thicken, and the stars outside began to distort, swirling into shapes too monstrous to comprehend. It was as though the universe itself was being unraveled. The entity's voice was a constant whisper in their minds now, a low, guttural growl that sent chills down their spines. You think you can defy me? You are nothing. You are expendable. But Ilara's resolve hardened. She wouldn't let the entity break them. Not now, not when they had come so far. Humanity had fought against insurmountable odds before, and they would do it again. Adaro, she said, her voice steady. Is the burst ready? Adaro's fingers hesitated for a moment before he nodded, his jaw clenched. It's ready. Charging now. The moment we release it, the rift's gravitational field should destabilize, giving us a window. But, Captain, if it doesn't work, we'll be pulled in. All of us. Ilara's gaze never wavered. Then we make sure it works. Her crew was with her. She could feel it in the air, an unspoken unity, an unbreakable will to survive. They had already overcome so much, defied the impossible at every turn. Now they faced the ultimate test. Carter was at his console, eyes darting from readout to readout. The ship was beginning to tremble again, the rift's gravity continuing to claw at them with ever-increasing force. Power levels are stable, he said, his voice tight with concentration. Ready when you are, Captain. Ilara nodded. She turned to face the crew, her gaze sweeping across each of them, each person who had fought by her side to this point. The stakes had never been higher. The Prometheus was their home, and they would defend it with every ounce of strength they had left. On my mark, Ilara said, her voice low but resolute. Adaro, release the burst. Carter, full power to the engines. A beat of silence passed, heavy with anticipation. The entity's whispers grew louder, more insistent. You cannot escape. You belong to me. But in that moment, Ilara felt something shift. The crew wasn't afraid anymore. They weren't just trying to survive, they were fighting to live, to push back against the abyss, to prove that no darkness, no matter how ancient or infinite, could claim them. Now, Ilara shouted. The ship jolted as the burst of energy was unleashed. The core of the Prometheus hummed with a surge of power so intense it made the entire hull shake. Adaro's fingers flew over his console, executing the final sequence that sent the energy blast straight into the heart of the rift. For a moment, time seemed to stretch, the universe holding its breath. The rift flickered, its pulsating edges shuddering in the wake of the energy burst. A sharp, piercing sound rang through the ship like the cry of a dying star. The gravitational field destabilized. For a brief instant, the pull of the rift weakened. Engines. At full power! Carter shouted, slamming his hand onto the throttle. The ship lurched forward, surging ahead with all the might they could muster. The rift seemed to fight back, the darkness screaming, twisting in violent, chaotic patterns. The entity's presence intensified, its voice now a deafening roar in their minds. You think this is over? This is only the beginning. But Ilara's eyes were fixed on the swirling vortex outside. They weren't just escaping the rift, they were fighting through it. The Prometheus shot forward, the blackness of the rift receding behind them as they pushed harder, faster. The ship's trajectory wavered, fighting against the last remnants of the rift's pull. The crew clung to their stations, pushing themselves. to the brink of exhaustion. Ilara's hands were firm on the helm, her every movement calculated, instinctive, and then, like the breaking of a storm, the ship tore through the rift's edge. The pull of the abyss released its grip, the overwhelming darkness giving way to the vastness of space. The stars outside bloomed back into view, their cold light flickering like beacons in the infinite expanse. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. The Prometheus hung in the void, free. The crew slowly exhaled, their faces a mix of disbelief and exhaustion. They had done it. Against all odds, they had escaped. But Ilara knew the battle was far from over. The entity would never, truly let them go. It was relentless. It would wait. But for now, the crew had won. And that, she thought, was something the darkness would never take away from them. "Status report," Ilara said, her voice steady, though it quivered ever so slightly with relief. Carter was the first to speak. "We're clear, Captain. We've broken free from the rift's influence. The ship's systems are holding steady, for now at least." Adaro nodded. "But the entity's still out there, Captain. It's just waiting, and we don't know how long we have before it finds us again." Ilara's gaze hardened as she turned to face her crew, her voice filled with quiet resolve. "Then we prepare. We find a way to end this. We fight until the very end. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't in its weapons or its technology. It was in its ability to endure, to push forward even when the universe itself seemed determined to crush it. The Prometheus had broken through the darkest depths of space, but it was the human spirit that had truly triumphed. And as long as that spirit burned, no darkness would ever claim them.